Hello everyone. This video is about the Great Baltimore Fire of 1904 that devastated and crippled the city like no other fire on record has before or since. With that being said, let's get right into it. The Great Baltimore Fire raged in Baltimore, Maryland from Sunday, February 7th to Monday, February 8th, 1904. In the fire, more than 1,500 buildings were completely leveled and about 1,000 severely damaged, bringing property loss caused by the disaster to an estimated $100 million. Both professional and volunteer firefighters helped get the blaze under control with help from surrounding counties and states. It destroyed a large portion of central Baltimore, covering an area of about 140 acres. Fire was reported first at the John Hurst and Company building on West German Street at Hopkins Place, currently the CFG Bank Arena in the western part of downtown Baltimore at 10:48 a.m. on Sunday, February 7, 1904. It spread quickly, and soon it became apparent that the fire was outstripping the ability of the city's firefighting resources, and calls for help were telegraphed to other cities. By 1:30 p.m., units from Washington, D.C. were arriving on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad at Camden Street Station. To halt the fire, officials decided to use a fire break and demolish buildings around the existing fire. This tactic, however, proved unsuccessful. Not until 5 p.m. the next day was the fire brought under control, after burning for 30 hours. One reason for the fire's duration was the lack of national standards in firefighting equipment. Fire crews and fire engines came from as far away as Philadelphia and Washington that day. Units from New York City were blocked by a train accident, and they arrived the next day, Monday, February 8th. The crews brought their own equipment. However, most could only watch helplessly after discovering that their hoses could not connect to Baltimore's hydrant's gauge size, although a machine shop in the Locust Point area of the city did start making coupling rings to overcome this problem. High winds and freezing temperatures further contributed to the fire's extent and firefighters' difficulties. As a result, the fire burned for over 30 hours, destroying 1,545 buildings and spanning 70 city blocks, amounting to over 140 acres. While Baltimore was criticized for its hydrants, this problem was not unique. During that era, American cities had more than 600 different sizes and variations of fire hose couplings. As outside firefighters returned to their home cities, newspapers published interviews that condemned Baltimore and exaggerated locals' response during the crisis. In addition, many newspapers published accounts by travelers who in actuality had only seen the fire as their trains passed through Baltimore. Nonetheless, the responding agencies and their equipment did prove useful, since the uncoupleable hoses only represented a small part of the transported equipment. Ultimately, the tragedy led to the standardization of fire hydrants nationwide. Alongside firefighters, outside police officers, as well as the Maryland National Guard and the Naval Brigade, were utilized during the fire to maintain order and protect the city. Police and soldiers not only kept looters away, but also prevented civilians from inadvertently interfering with firefighting efforts. The Naval Brigade secured the waterfront and waterways to keep spectators away. Officers from Philadelphia and New York also assisted the Baltimore City Police Department. Thomas Albert Lors, a Baltimore native and letter carrier with the U.S. Post Office, rescued tons of mail from the burning Central Post Office on the east side of Battle Monument Square on North Calvert Street between East Lexington and Fayette Streets. Lors gathered a group of men who loaded bags of mail onto horse-drawn wagons, took them to North and Pennsylvania Avenues, and stood guard until the Maryland National Guard arrived. Meanwhile, back at the General Post Office, employees kept spraying water on the building's sides and roof, and were able to minimize damage and save the 1889 Italian Renaissance edifice with its 9 towers and central tall clock tower that was later razed and replaced by the current 1932 building, and was eventually converted for city use as Courthouse East. In the aftermath, 35,000 people were left unemployed. Over $150 million in 1904 USD worth of damage was done, which is approximately $3.84 billion today. Immediately after the fire, the Baltimore News quoted Mayor Robert McLean saying, "To suppose that the spirit of our people will not rise to the occasion is to suppose that our people are not genuine Americans. We shall make the fire of 1904 a landmark not of decline, but of progress." McLean then refused assistance, saying, "As head of this municipality, I cannot help but feel gratified by the sympathy and the offers of practical assistance which have been tendered to us." To them, he in general terms replied, "Baltimore will take care of its own. Thank you." 2 years later, on September 10, 1906, the Sun reported that the city had risen from the ashes and that, quote, One of the great disasters of modern time had been converted into a blessing, end quote. Most agreed that the Great Fire directly caused no deaths. However, an autobiography written by Alice May Cawthorn tells of a couple named Mr. and Mrs. Chamber who lost their twin daughters in the Baltimore fire. There are also reports of a merchant suffering a heart attack while evacuating goods from a store. This is most likely because deaths were not recorded accurately at that time. A bronze historical marker commemorating the Great Fire was placed next to the main western entrance of the wholesale fish market, which is now the Port Discovery Children's Museum. It was one of 3 new adjoining center market structures, replacing the old burned second center market building and the Maryland Institute of 1851. The major commemorative tablet reads, "Lives lost, none." However, a recently rediscovered newspaper story from the Sun tells of the charred remains of a colored man being pulled almost 2 weeks after the fire from the harbor basin, which is the modern inner harbor area near the USS Constellation dock. Also known as Old Pier 2, 5 lost lives were indirectly attributed to the fire. 2 members of the 4th Regiment of the Maryland National Guard fell ill and died of pneumonia caused by exposure. Fireman Mark Kelly and Fire Lieutenant John A. McNew also died of pneumonia and tuberculosis due to exposure. Martin Mullen, the proprietor of Mullen's Hotel, on the northwest corner of West Baltimore and North Liberty Streets, above Hopkins Place and a block to the north of the John E. Hurst building where the fire started, also unfortunately passed away sometime later. Lastly, Mayor McLean's mysterious and sudden death later that year, rolled a sewer slide, was also attributed by some of his contemporaries to the stress of post-fire reconstruction. As a result of the fire, Baltimore finally adopted a city building code after 17 nights of hearings and multiple city council reviews. The city's downtown burnt district was rebuilt using more fireproof materials such as granite and brick. Public pressure, coupled with the demands of companies acquiring insurance for the newly reconstructed buildings, spurred the effort. The National Fire Protection Association adopted a national standard for fire hydrant and hose connections. However, inertia remained. Conversion was slow and remains incomplete to this day, 100 plus years after the Baltimore fire. Only 18 of the 48 most populous American cities were reported to have national standard fire hydrants. As a result, hose incompatibility largely contributed to the Oakland firestorm of 1991. Although the standard hose coupling has a 2.5-inch diameter, Oakland's hydrants unfortunately had 3-inch couplings.
A new federal standard and the city's first ever sewer system are just 2 of the lasting results of the Great Fire of Baltimore. That fire started 110 years ago today and is an important part of the city's history. 11 News reporter Jennifer Franciati takes a look back.
All these streets were destroyed.
At the Fire Museum of Maryland, one of the most popular exhibits reveals the history of the Great Fire of Baltimore. It happened 110 years ago this weekend. 140 acres were destroyed in less than 2 days in a fire that stretched a mile across the city.
86 blocks burned in 30 hours. Blocks were falling at the rate of 1 every 20 minutes. Another block would fall.
The fire started Sunday morning, February 7th, inside the Hurst building on Liberty Street.
We believe that a cigarette had fallen down into the basement and smoldered there.
The dry goods store exploded, and by the time it was all said and done, the fire would destroy 1,500 buildings and 2,500 businesses in its path to the Jones Falls, where firefighters would stop the flames before ravaging the entire city. Amazingly, only 2 people lost their lives.
However, the worst tragedy was, just like the 9/11 survivors, a lot of these firemen died of pneumonias and smoke inhalation and lung disease.
Fire companies came by train from Philly, D.C., New York, and Delaware to help, but their hose couplers didn't fit Baltimore hydrants. It's a problem that would lead to federal hydrant standards just 2 years later. And resilient, it took only 2 years to rebuild the city. Its layout, though, would be forever changed.
One of the reasons why the fire was so devastating is because the streets had been laid out since colonial times. They were narrow. The firemen would get up into a section, and the flames would leap over them and just keep spreading. They couldn't get out in time. They widened the streets. They buried all the electric lines that actually blocked the water from getting onto the buildings, and they started the first sewer system in Baltimore. They didn't have sewer systems before that.
At the Lutherville Fire Museum, you can see hundreds of old pictures, artifacts, and actual fire apparatus from the third worst fire in the nation's history. And if you want to learn more about the Great Fire of Baltimore, the museum has put out 4 books like this on the subject, and there's also a tour on Sunday that starts right here at the museum and ends in the Burnt District. Here in Lutherville, Jennifer Franciotti, WBAL TV 11 News.
The Great Baltimore Fire has gone down in history as the third worst conflagration in an American city, surpassed only by the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 and the San Francisco Earthquake and Fire of 1906. Hopefully, you found this video to be informative. I've only seen a handful of YouTube videos about the fire, and most are lacking in extensive detail. Thank you all for watching, and as usual, if you're a fan of urban legends, folklore, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and all things mysterious, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel.